It's around 8 a.m. on the morning of April 12th, 1981, in the rural Sierra Nevada in California, at a former railroad town called Keddie. 14-year-old Sheila Sharp has just come home to her property at number 28 of the Keddie Resort community. She'd spent the previous evening at her friend's home, who lived opposite her house at number 27. As she walks in the door, she calls out. In the home should have been her mother, Sue, her 4 siblings, Tina, John, Rick and Greg, and John's friend, Dana Wingate. As she walks further into the home in the living room, she discovers a horrifying scene. Her mother, Sue, brother John and his friend Dana are laying on the floor, deceased. As soon as she discovers the bodies, she runs, terrified, from the home, screaming for help. Her discovery would spark an over 30-year mystery into a brutal quadruple homicide. My name's Jack Lawrence. Welcome to Crime at Bedtime. Before we head back to California and the investigation into a quadruple homicide in Sierra Nevada, it's time to take a minute, time to relax and focus on our breathing. As always, using the 4-6-8 method, we'll breathe in slow and deep through the nose for 4 seconds, hold the breath for 6, and then slow and controlled, breathe out for 8. Here we go. Breathing in for 4, really filling the lungs, hold, slow and controlled, back out through the mouth. And again, slow, deep, full breath through the nose, fill the lungs for 4 seconds. Hold, and slow and controlled, back out through the mouth. Let's go one more time. Slow and deep through the nose, fill those lungs. Hold the breath. And again, slow and controlled, back out for 8 seconds. Now, as you breathe normally, let's head back to California and the investigation into a bizarre quadruple homicide. In 1979, Glenna Susan Sharp, known simply as Sue, was looking for a new beginning. She'd separated from her husband, James Sharp, packed up her life in Connecticut with her 5 children, and made the long drive across the country to Northern California, where her brother Don lived. Sue was doing what many single parents try to do: rebuild away from the noise, in a place where her children could grow up safe and happy. At first, the family moved into a small trailer in Quincy. However, by the following autumn, they had relocated to Cabin 28 at the Keddie Resort, a former railroad town that had slowly faded into a collection of aging cabins nestled in the pines. Keddie had once been a popular getaway in the Sierra Nevada mountains, but by the early 1980s, its charm had faded. The resort had become home to low-income families and those like Sue, trying to start over. Cabin 28 was basic, but it was spacious. And Sue lived there with her children, 15-year-old John, 14-year-old Sheila, 12-year-old Tina, 10-year-old Rick, and little Greg, who was just 5. It was modest, but it was home. Saturday, April 11th, 1981 would begin quietly. Sue, Sheila and Greg had spent the morning at the Meeks house, a family they were close with. Around midday, they went to pick up Rick from baseball tryouts in Quincy. Along the way, they spotted 15-year-old John and his friend Dana Hall Wingate. The boys were hitchhiking at the mouth of the canyon leading back toward Keddie, a perfectly acceptable means of getting around for teenagers in the 80s in this part of the world. The pair had apparently been trying to get into town to meet up with friends. Sue picks them up and drops them off back near the cabin. That afternoon, John and Dana were seen again in Quincy. It's believed they may have been trying to visit someone or find a party, just typical teenager behaviour. However, they would return to the cabin later that evening. Back in Keddie, Sheila made plans to sleep over at the Seabold home next door in cabin 27. Her sister Tina had been watching television there but would return home just after 9:30 p.m. Inside cabin 28 that night were Sue, her three youngest boys, Rick, Greg and John, and their friends, Justin Smart and Dana Wingate. Eventually, Tina would also join them. Sheila, next door, would be the only member of the family not inside the house that night. By all accounts, the resort was quiet. Nobody reported hearing anything unusual that evening. That was, of course, until the next morning. At 8 o'clock the next morning, Sunday, April 12th, Sheila returns home to grab some clothes before church. What she finds inside cabin 28 would scar her for life. Her mother Sue, brother John, and Dana Wingate were dead in the living room. Blood soaked the floor. Furniture was overturned. The bodies had been bound with tape and electrical cord. It was chaos, brutal and deliberate chaos. Sheila ran back to the Seabolds for help. Jamie Seabold, the family's father, entered the home briefly to check for any survivors, which he would find. The boys, Rick, Greg and their friend Justin, were found physically unharmed in a nearby bedroom, seemingly having slept through the entire gruesome event. To try and avoid contaminating the scene even more, he would take the boys out through the bedroom window. Once everyone was out of the home, they run back to cabin 27 and call 911. And police and investigators are quickly on the scene. Sue Sharp was found near the living room sofa, lying on her side, nude from the waist down. She'd been gagged with her underwear and a blue bandana, secured in place with tape. Her injuries were extreme. She'd been stabbed in the chest and her throat had been cut so violently it had sliced through her voice box and into her spine. On the side of her head was a deep indentation, an imprint that had been left by the butt of a gun. In fact, police believed it to be a Daisy 880 Powerline pellet gun. John's body was nearby. His throat had been slashed and his skull beaten with what appeared to be a hammer. And Dana had been strangled and also suffered blunt force trauma to the head. Blood was everywhere. Autopsy results later confirmed Sue and John did in fact die from a combination of stabbing and blunt force trauma, and Dana had been asphyxiated. And all of it, this violent, targeted bloodbath, had taken place while three small boys lay in a bedroom just a wall away. But what of young Tina? She was still missing. Investigators on the scene collected all evidence they could, including a bent steak knife found on the floor, a butcher's knife covered in blood, and a claw hammer. These two items were found on a small wooden table in the entryway near the kitchen. As well as these items, police of course also collected witness statements, but many say from the outset the investigation was marked by missed opportunities and mishandled leads. Justin Smart, who was in the bedroom with his two friends and was just 12 years old at the time, gave several different accounts. In one version, he said he dreamed about the murders. He would be placed under hypnosis, and he described seeing two unknown men with Sue in the living room. Sketches were made, but oddly, not by trained FBI or state forensic artists. Instead, the task was handed to a local volunteer with absolutely no experience. Why this happened has never been properly explained. For weeks, investigators searched for the missing Tina Sharp. The FBI joined the case briefly before backing out, citing confidence in the California DOJ's efforts. A 5-mile radius was searched, dogs are brought in, and tips are chased down. But there was no sign of the 12-year-old girl. Then, in April of 1984, a bottle collector discovered the cranium portion of a human skull and part of a mandible at Camp 18 near Feather Falls in neighbouring Butte County, roughly 5 miles from Feather Falls and 50 miles from Keddie. When news of the discovery broke on the 3rd anniversary of the murders, police received an anonymous tip in regards to the discovery. The tipster suggested to the person on the phone that the skull that they had found could belong to the missing Tina Sharp, the missing girl from the Keddie Murders.
I was watching the news, and they were talking about this skull found at the foot of falls. They asked for any help. And I was just wondering if you thought of the murder up in Keddie, up in Plymouth County a couple of years ago, where a 12-year-old girl was never found.
And that was Keddie, K-E-D-D-Y?
K-E-D-D-I-E.
Okay.
Up in Plymouth County.
The skull was sent off to be examined, and soon enough, dental records did indeed confirm the fact that these were the remains of Tina. The caller who rang with the tip was never identified, and the recording of that call would vanish into an evidence box, only to resurface decades later. So who were the main suspects in this case? Well, at the time of the murders, police really honed in on just 2 possibilities. Marty Smart and his roommate, a guy by the name of Bo Babetti. These 2 men lived a couple of doors down from the Sharp family. Marty was in fact the father of young Justin, who was one of the only surviving boys who was at the house that night, asleep in the room opposite. So why did police look at Marty Smart? Well, Marty was married to Marilyn, Justin's mother. It is reported that Marty Smart was an abusive husband and was often violent towards his wife. Sue, having recently herself escaped a domestic violence situation, was said to have been helping Marilyn and talking to her about the situation, advising her on what to do. When Marty discovered that Sue had been meddling in his marriage and talking with his wife, he supposedly lost it. He would tell police that one of his hammers from his home had recently gone missing, which seemed like an odd thing to point out. Was he making excuses as to potentially why they may find an item linked to this crime that was also linked to him? Even more suspiciously, just weeks after the murders, Marty leaves town and moves to Reno. During the investigation of the crime scene, police strongly suspected that the crime had in fact been conducted by multiple people, which is where Bo Babetti's name was brought into the mix. Bo was himself an ex-con with apparent links to organised crime. The investigation, although seemingly having some strong leads to explore, goes quiet. Many suggesting that investigators failed miserably to look further into the possible suspects. Mr. Wingate, the father of Dana, the boy who also lost his life that night, was very outspoken about his anger at the investigation, saying that police stumbled over each other and fouled up the case, with many voicing similar opinions, and others even suggesting they believed that for some reason the police appeared to be involved in some form of a cover-up. But why? Why would police try and cover up the crime? Well, there are some that suggest that the former sheriff of the office investigating the crime was good friends with the prime suspect, Marty Smart. Accusations of a cover-up have been vehemently denied by Doug Thomas, who came out and said, quote, "There was no shortage of suspects, but suddenly 35 years later, everybody has all figured out what happened and that all the investigating officers were corrupt. It's laughable. Martin Smart was not a friend of mine." By the early 2000s, Cabin 28 had been abandoned, and in 2004 it was finally demolished. But the case was far from dead. In 2013, a new lease of life was brought to the investigation. Plumas County Sheriff Greg Hagwood and Special Investigator Mike Gamberg began combing through old evidence, and they discovered boxes of supposedly forgotten material. They would find the tape with the anonymous caller, as well as a letter from Martin Smart, his wife. One line among the letter stood out. It stated, "I've paid the price of your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives. You tell me we're through? Great. What else do you want?" Marilyn, his former wife, says she does not remember receiving the letter, although she did confirm that it did look like her former husband's handwriting. As for the 911 tape with the anonymous tipster, new Sheriff Greg Hagwood said why that sat in a sealed evidence envelope and never opened, he didn't have the answer to. However, they have it now. Investigator Mike Gamberg would interview a local counsellor of Marty's. The counsellor claimed Martin had in fact confessed to the actual crime itself, and that he was shocked that police at the time hadn't used that as a reason to arrest him. And lastly, a hammer matching the one Martin claimed he lost was pulled from a nearby pond, deliberately placed, not discarded. A man using a metal detector around the pond near Keddie had found it.
What hadn't been discovered until just last month, a hammer, believed to be one of the murder weapons.
The hammer was laying, and you can tell that it was somewhere wet. Yeah, this is the front porch.
Special Investigator Mike Gamberg took us back to where that hammer was found.
However, unfortunately, the hammer by now was so badly rusted that DNA could not be extracted from it. Over 40 years have passed since that spring night in 1981. For a long time, Keddie was a ghost town, forgotten by most, haunted by the few who remained. The Sharps were a family just trying to make life work. Dana Wingate was a kid with his whole future ahead of him. And Tina was just 12. Theories abound. Some believe the crime was personally targeted. Others see a conspiracy, a cover-up. But for the families, none of that changes the pain of what was lost. Despite suspects' confessions, physical evidence, and witness accounts, justice has never been served. With the 2 main suspects since deceased, the real killers may never be brought to justice. The cabin is gone. The town is quiet. But the questions still echo through those pines. Crime at Bedtime is a Mashed Pumpkin production. Written, hosted and produced by Jack Lawrence. Audio and sound design by Jack Lawrence and Dom Evans of Earsay.